Now, the problem Australia and New Zealand face with our Super Rugby competition is we're not generating that money. So somehow we have to figure out a way logistically to generate more money from Super Rugby. Looking after your juniors, bringing them through, that's what happens. What you saw at the last World Cup was 20 years of not investing in our juniors the way we should.
DSPN, the Devlin Sports Podcast Network.
DSPN, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lachlan, usually behind the scenes producing this podcast. I have been hosting in parts with Martin Devlin on holiday. This is part two of my chat with Matt Williams. In part one, we talked about the All Blacks and the Wallabies' first test this weekend, the Rugby Championship. Is Australian rugby turning around for good? Maybe, maybe not. In part two, we talk more broadly about international rugby, the top 14, whether or not there's any benefit in New Zealand and Australia potentially heading up north and mirroring what South Africa did with their club comps. Should we just get rid of Super Rugby for good? Do we need to make that hard decision? This part, though, starts off with Matt and I talking about international rugby right now and how close it has become. Gone are the years where it was just New Zealand, Australia, South Africa and England with France in parts. We now have Ireland, Argentina, Scotland giving these big nations not only a run for their money but actually beating them on a regular basis. Obviously, Wales hopefully will return to some form of competitiveness, but there was a time where they were number one in the world and that was just 5-6 years ago. So, it's nice for the All Blacks to continually win if we're a Kiwi rugby fan. We love that, but it is good that the rest of the world is competitive. That's an ideal scenario, right?
Yeah, exactly. And look, I always feel that New Zealand rugby fans and even your ex-players and commentators who I really admire and I listen to and respect deeply, you know, what guys like Justin Marshall and these guys, what they say, they really know the game and I really enjoy what they say. But, you know, whenever New Zealand loses a game, they smash their coach. They just smash their coach. And you go right back to the days of John Hart, you know, Chris Wiley, you go right through all the generations. Every time New Zealand loses a game, they smash the coach. And you know, it's just not right. You know, Ian Foster, the last, you know, when they got beaten in South Africa a couple of years ago, he copped absolutely appalling abuse that no one in sport should cop. And you know, he got New Zealand to a World Cup final that they almost and should have won. You know, I thought without what happened to Sam Cane, who knows what would have happened.
Well, if Moanga and Barrett get a couple of kicks, we win that probably, don't we? So
absolutely, and a couple of shocking refereeing decisions and penalties and so on. You know, so look, and that's what. But my point is, it's not like when I grew up. You know, Australia just couldn't beat New Zealand. When I was a kid, you know, the great players were just dominating still, and they dominate the world. Now, the professionalism has changed. That 25 years into professionalism, the major competition in the world is the French top 14. It's not Super Rugby anymore. When I was coaching, Super Rugby was the dominant international club competition, and were producing the World Cup winning teams. That they were coming out of Super Rugby, you know, and with the exception of England winning, you know, Johnny Wilkins' drop goal in 2003. That's what was occurring. And, you know, that's just not the case anymore. The best competition in the world, where all the money is and where the good players are going, is France, is going to the north. And that has dramatically changed what's occurring. And Australia and New Zealand being in Super Rugby has reduced that. You know, we really missed the influence of the South Africans and how they're playing. Now, there's, you know, the implications of this are too long for a podcast. My point is the environment is never still. It's constantly evolving and changing. And New Zealand and Australia have to adapt. And part of that adaptation is it's not going to be like the old days when New Zealand and South Africa just ran the whole show. Yeah. The other teams are developing because of professionalism and because of their ability to change and adapt within that. And we're seeing that, you know, like, to me, the four best teams in the last World Cup were Ireland, France, New Zealand, and South Africa. Now, the horrendous draw had all four of them on one side of the competition. And those quarterfinals where Ireland and South Africa lost, Ireland and France lost by minute margins.
A combined 5 points.
Yeah. And look, some horrendous refereeing decisions as well in those. So the playing field is so even. That's a great thing for our game. That is a great thing for our game. It's tough for the New Zealanders, but there's a reality we all have to embrace, and that's just the reality. But we also have to understand, like rugby league. Look, it's the east coast of Australia. The Wars don't had a great season. Unfortunately, they bowed out. But and a tiny spot on the north of England in Manchester. And I love my rugby league. I'm a Tigers supporter, Balmain, West, follow my whole life. I love my rugby league. But that's the reality. Rugby is global.
Yeah.
Rugby is the globe. The second biggest team sport in the world behind soccer. And we've got these 10 or 12 major countries that are playing and changing. And again, the top 14, the money in the top 14 is allowing the Argentinians to play at a very high level, get great sports science, all these pluses, and then return to their side and play. And similar to South Africans are either in the top 14 or over in Japan. So these things are changing the environment, and we are witnessing the evolution of the game in the Rugby Championship and possibly its future. And if that's the future, that is positive.
Yeah,
it's because it's fun to watch. I know that wasn't fun to watch for the Kiwis at the Cape Town, right?
Yeah.
But mate, I was in awe of the South Africans and how they played.
Oh, yeah. Matt, the thing I love, and you talked about the fixtures that are at the end of the year there, and the thing I love about them, like France and Ireland at the start of next year, I mean, there's a storyline there. There's France going to Dublin in the last Six Nations and really smacking up that Irish side and totally outplaying them. And then you've got Ireland and Australia, who had a great test last year. You've got us against Ireland. There's like sort of a nice rivalry there, really starting to brew. The state of the game internationally, and we've talked about it a lot already, is just superb. If you're Australia and New Zealand, do you want to get amongst the Northern Hemisphere or the Japanese sort of club scene? Is that something you think is better for both Australia and New Zealand? Or do you think it's best that we stayed? Like, I have these chats with my dad all the time. My dad's he loves the idea of how rugby was in sort of the older days, as I think a lot of sort of older fans do, where they love the fact that we had the NPC and then Australia had their comps and then Super Rugby started off really well. But you made a point just before that, rugby's evolving and it changes and things adapt and you've got to adapt with it. Is it best for New Zealand and Australia to really do away with Super Rugby and head up north, do you think?
Look, money talks. Why have South Africa gone north? They haven't gone, it is really, the South Africans used to complain when we had Super Rugby that they had to come to Australia and New Zealand and be on tour for a month. And the Australians and New Zealanders only had to go to South Africa for 2 weeks, which is absolutely true. When I was coaching in Super Rugby, we would go over, play 2 games, come back, and then the South African teams would play 2 games in Australia, 2 games in New Zealand. So they're on the road 4 to 5 weeks. And it was really hard on them, and I get that. In one of the South African franchises now in the URC starts this weekend. Leinster Mile Club is down in South Africa. To get to South Africa, they've got to fly from Dublin to, I don't know if they go through London, I'm not sure, but they definitely have to go to Abu Dhabi down to Joburg into Cape Town, where their first game is.
Yep.
It's a long flight. They do that once a year for 2 weeks, including for 2 games, so 2 weeks in total. Then you've got the Champions Cup in the north, so they have 2 competitions. Some of the South African teams are travelling, I read this, up to 7 times a year to the north. They're doing that trip in reverse, up through Cape Town to Joburg to Abu Dhabi to London on their on flight wherever they're playing their provincial team. It could be in Italy, it could be in France, it could be any of the 4 nations there, mate. And that is killing them.
Yeah,
it sounds much massive fatigue.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. And so the talk that it was a month in Australia and South Africa and New Zealand that made us go north is absolutely a lie. It is just a lie, because they're doing this so many times a year and it's killing them. It's a longer trip. With all those changes, it's a longer trip. You would go Joburg to Sydney or Joburg to Perth, whatever it was, straight away. Now, in the old days, what is driving it is money. Now, the problem Australia and New Zealand face with our Super Rugby competition is we're not generating that money. So somehow we have to figure out a way logistically to generate more money from Super Rugby. Like our national teams are producing buckets of money because we're selling out stadiums and we're getting great TV revenue. It's what we do with our club product. remembering that if we don't have a strong, highly competitive club product, like this year's was, because the Australians were more competitive against the New Zealanders, they weren't where they were 20 years ago, but they were far more competitive, winning games. If we don't have that competition and the money, we will not survive. So whether that answer is New Zealand or whether that answer is a global club competition, though logistically, I can't see it. Because we've got one other problem holding all this back. The top 14 will not reduce the number of games they've played. So like they start in August and finish the final is in June. Like that is 10 months of competition. Now you've got all these other you've got the Six Nations, the November Internationals, and the Champions Cup, the old Heineken Cup in amongst that. But until we can get the French clubs to reduce the length of their competition,
because they played and it played a part in the series that we had with France here in New Zealand, where they were still competitive. That French side, the French B team, they were still pretty competitive. But we didn't get to see some of their best players like Intermac and all these guys.
You didn't get their best side, but without a doubt. And the last time they toured Australia in a 3-test series, they was definitely their second.
Yep.
Now that and that's not good for any of us. Now this new, well, it's good for France because it allows them to blood a second tier of player. But their season is just so demanding and so long that it's affecting the rest of the globe. So World Rugby has to address that, but it's very hard because they don't own the clubs. The clubs are privately owned by the presidents over there. The French Rugby Union doesn't own the clubs like the New Zealand Rugby Union, the Australian Rugby Union own the super franchises. So in many ways, they can't tell them that. Now, you've got top 14, you've got a Pro D2, which is second division of 16 clubs, and then another division under that, all fully professional. I think it's 12 teams in that other division below that. I just don't quote me on that. But so what the idea was to have 3 divisions of 12.
Yeah.
And of course, that reduces the revenue for the clubs because they don't get as many games. And so the presidents are against that. So you're caught in this hard place. If they could reduce the length of that season, that would allow a window for your national club window, which a lot of people want to see. That'd be, that would be seeing Leinster play Auckland or Canterbury or the Brumbies. This would be fantastic. It'd be being Toulouse, who play magnificent rugby, down to Eden Park. What a great day that would be to see Toulouse in Eden Park or at the Sydney Football Stadium against the Waratahs. That would be the hope. That's the aspiration. Whether you can get a Super Rugby franchise out of the West Coast of America and a URC franchise on the East Coast of America playing in there is another that's certainly mooted. And I've spoken to people in America that want that because the MLR in America is struggling. That's their competition. There's all these options, but it's all about money. It's got to be profitable and it's got to generate, and it's also got to be logistically possible. And right now, on all of those fronts, we're not ticking those boxes. But that's where Super Rugby, when I coached, was so good when you had the South Africans, Australia and New Zealand. We were producing phenomenal rugby. We were making money. And it was one of the great rugby products in the world, if not the best. And unfortunately, through a series of very poor administrative decisions over 15 years, they busted the competition. And it didn't need to be broken. It was a fabulous comp.
No, it was awesome. I have the most brilliant memories as a young kid watching Super 12, and then when it became Super 14, that was like, okay, that's enough. We can leave it at the Force, and I think the Cheetahs were the 2 new teams when it became Super 14. Let's leave it at that for a little bit, and then they just got greedy when they brought in this conference system, and then Japan and South America involved, and it was just all too much, wasn't it?
It lost. Well, I couldn't follow it. Conferences, you didn't know who was who.
Yep.
They didn't grow it properly.
I mean, there's a year where the Lions made the final, finished top of the table, but they didn't even play a Kiwi team. Yeah.
It was a joke. It was a joke, and you compare that to the high quality of Super 12, which was phenomenal. The trouble was there wasn't enough games. What do? Well, you just do 1.5 games. You do one. You couldn't do 2 rounds. It was too long a season. Well, just break those ends up. So you could have, instead of just having 11 with 12 teams, you're going to get 5 home games or 6 home games. Make it that you get 8 home games. There's a way you could do it. Like in the NRL, you don't play everyone home and away. There's not every team plays everyone home and away. There's a way they structure the competition. It could have very easily been done to generate more money. We're still providing high quality games that that the fans still understood. But unfortunately, look, our administrators in Australia and New Zealand during that period really let us down.
Yeah.
They let Australian rugby down. Like, we're only just recovering now. We've got two Wallabies in charge of Australian rugby. You've got Dan Herbert as chairman and Philly Waugh as CEO. Guys who've played, junior footy, schools footy, club footy. They played for their provinces and they played for Australia. They understand it. They're not giant businessmen coming from the business world who have made so many bad decisions in rugby because they don't understand the game. These guys mightn't be titans of industry, but they understand the game and they're starting to sort it out in Australia. And that's why you're seeing the change, because they're making good decisions on who they're appointing, who's going into coaching positions, how we're playing the game. They're doing, it's not solving everything, but they're making good decisions. They made a good TV deal. We made a little bit more money on the TV deal. Now, to put that into perspective, the rugby TV deal in Australia is 14% of what the AFL TV deal is in finances. So we are only getting 40% of the 14% of the revenue that the AFL is getting on TV in Australia. So that puts into perspective the financial troubles Australian rugby has. Now, the Lions has helped solve that. We've got the World Cup coming up in 2 years, and then the Women's World Cup after that. So from going on financial disaster, it was. The guys were telling me they were insolvent. They've got to collapse. To being, we're back to even, and then we'll make money. Once you're back to making money, like covering expenses for the whole game, we can do things. Like, to give you an example, there's less development officers in Australian rugby. Well, there was 2 years ago. So what's that? 2023. There were less development officers in Australian rugby than there were in 1999.
Jeez.
So that tells you, because they've got the money to pay.
Yeah.
So that tells you the dire straits of finances in Australia. Now, that's changed. If the money changes, then you can pay people, you can start investing in your kids, investing in developing young talent, looking after your juniors, bringing them through. That's what happens. What you saw at the last World Cup was 20 years of not investing in our juniors the way we should. We're still not right. We're still not coaching right. We're not coaching everything right with especially our halves and our halves. Our first fives, as you call them in New Zealand. We're not coaching those kids right, and that's why we've got such a problem. You mentioned George Gregan and Lachlan. Think before that of Nick Farr-Jones, Mark Ella, Michael Liner. Why have we stopped producing 9s and 10s? Because we're not coaching them as kids. We're not teaching them. It's like you're not producing mathematicians. You're not producing mathematicians. You're not teaching them the basics of maths when they're at school. We're not teaching our 9s and 10s the basics of how to play. And that still is not addressed in Australia. But that gives you an example of why, because we've got no money, we stop educating coaches, we stop educating people the way we should. You start to lose all this knowledge from the game. The intergenerational knowledge is starting to be lost, or has been lost from the game in many ways. And how we backfill that, I don't know. But that is why we are where we are. And that all starts with finance now. And I think the faster, like, I'm from the generation of your dad, and I wish it was back in those days, but that's not coming back. It's never coming back.
Yeah.
If you think like that, you're dead. You've got to look forward. And so the first thing we have to do is, how do we perpetuate the game, make sure it doesn't die, because it was close to dying in Australia. And if it dies in Australia, New Zealand rugby is also under grave threat. So we've got to make sure it survives, and then we've got to grow it. Whether we grow it north to Japan, whether we grow it back to South Africa, because there's a lot of push that other South African provinces want to come into Super Rugby, or whether we do all of that and a franchise from America, well, that's for better brains than me that have the numbers in front of them. But it is a numbers game.
DSPN.